Our next required Supreme Court case is Shaw versus Reno. This case is significant because it ruled that race could not be a consideration when drawing voting districts and strengthened the idea that the government cannot treat people differently based on race without a very strong reason. Let's look at the facts in the case. After the 1990 census, North Carolina needed to redraw its congressional districts. The United States Attorney General said the state should include a second majority black district because the state had a large black population. In response, North Carolina created a district that was extremely thin, twisting for hundreds of miles along highways. It connected small pockets of black voters who lived far apart. A group of white voters complained. They said the government should not sort people into districts mainly on the basis of their race. This raised one central question for the Supreme Court. Can a state create oddly shaped voting districts if the goal is to increase the political power of one racial group? Okay, so before we zoom in on the court's holdings, meaning its final decisions, don't forget that you can grab the 1-hour Supreme Court Cases Mastery Playbook that's linked below. It's designed to help you to study all 14 required Supreme Court cases while watching my 1-hour Supreme Court Cases deep dive video, and also includes practice-free response questions for each case. I know from my own students that they want to see samples of completed answers, so this playbook shows you what the full free response answers could look like. And you just need to fill in the gaps to finish them off. This will help you get comfortable with how to master this free response question in the exam. Now, let's look at the court's holdings. The court ruled that a district drawn mainly because of race, especially if it is unusually shaped, can be challenged under the Equal Protection Clause, which says all people should be treated equally under the law. The court explained that even if the goal is to help a minority group, the Constitution does not allow the government to separate people by race unless there is a very strong reason. The court said that North Carolina's district shape was so bizarre that it strongly suggested the state used race as the main factor. This holding changed the future of redistricting by making it clear that racial gerrymandering is something courts can and should review. You might remember in our earlier discussion of Rucho versus Common Cause, which occurred in 2019, that the court ruled that politically partisan gerrymandering could not come before the courts. But Shaw versus Reno established that race-based gerrymandering can be challenged in courts. Now let's look at the political principle behind this case. The central idea is equal protection, established by the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. This means the government must treat people equally. Shaw versus Reno strengthened this principle by saying that even well-intentioned policies cannot use race as the main factor in drawing voting districts. Now let's compare this case to Bush versus Vera, which occurred in 1996, which was the non-required case that students had to compare to Shaw versus Reno in Set 2 of the 2025 AP exam. In this exam, students were required to identify the common constitutional clause between the two cases, and then they needed to explain the similarities in the holdings. So, let's look at what happened in Bush versus Vera. This case was very similar to Shaw versus Reno. Essentially, a group of voters claimed that Texas drew congressional districts mainly based on race. The Supreme Court agreed and held that the districts were unconstitutional because race had been the primary factor in drawing them, and the state did not have a strong enough reason to justify that decision. Now let's identify the common constitutional clause between Bush versus Vera and Shaw versus Reno. So, both cases deal with the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which is used as the basis for challenging race-based gerrymandering. Be aware that in the exam, students didn't get a clue about which clause was used in Bush versus Vera. They were expected to be able to identify that the Equal Protection Clause was the clause that was used because it's the clause that allows courts to hear cases about racial gerrymandering. And you would know that the Equal Protection Clause underpins racial gerrymandering challenges because you already have strong knowledge of the facts in Shaw versus Reno. Now let's compare the holdings of the two cases. The holding in Shaw versus Reno was that districts drawn mainly because of race can violate the Equal Protection Clause and must face strict scrutiny. The holding in Bush versus Vera was that Texas's use of race in creating districts was unconstitutional because race was the dominant factor and the state could not justify it. So the holdings are similar because both cases ruled that race cannot be the main reason for drawing voting districts unless the state has an extremely strong constitutional justification. Okay, that brings us to the end of this case. If you haven't got the Supreme Court Mastery Playbook yet, grab it from the link in the description and complete the knowledge quiz for this case now. Then, have a go at the essay response task where you'll get an inside look at an essay response that uses this Supreme Court case in an exam-style comparison question.